to the Finance and Tech podcast. I'm your host and Chief Finance Techie, Simon Ritchie. This is the show where we dive into all things technology for finance teams. I interview other finance techies, finance leaders, and industry legends who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build and grow your career in finance. In this episode, I talk to Jeff Duresky. He's a senior FinOps commercial architect at Amazon Web Services. So what is FinOps? Jeff explains that FinOps, or Cloud Financial Management, is really about analyzing and managing your spend on the cloud. This applies to software companies who are often hosting their product online, but also pretty much every company nowadays is migrating a lot of their internal IT servers and infrastructure up to the cloud because it's much more efficient. It's a great way to save money in a lot of different ways. Jeff's got a finance background. Data-driven insights have been a theme of his career thus far. His favorite quote is, "Effort is a choice." So he's somebody who works hard to achieve his goals. In the episode, he shares his tips and tricks on how to get a handle on your IT and cloud spend, how to unlock the total value of cloud for your business. Managing cloud spend can be complex. You've got massive data sets, complex pricing. Any number of people in your IT or software engineering departments could be provisioning infrastructure any time of the day. So understanding who provisions it, who owns it, who's paying for it, and who needs to switch it off is really important. So Jeff's got some great tips for us. His playbook is, I'd say, your golden ticket to cloud success. This is a really great episode. If you're spending a lot on IT and cloud, then there's some great advice in here for you. Enjoy it. So here we go. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Jeff. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Simon, how are you today?
Yeah, doing really good. So why don't you just give us a quick, in your own words, a little bit about your background and what brought you to the role that you have today.
Absolutely. So, my name is Jeff Duresky. I am a senior FinOps commercial architect at AWS, which everyone is probably asking, what does that even mean? So, my role currently focuses on cost optimization, cloud efficiency, and cloud financial management best practices for some of AWS's largest customers. So, customers that are in the cloud, our job is to really help them be more efficient and drive the efficiency of the cloud and have an overall, best practices with cloud financial management. Background leading to this, I've had a number of roles within FP&A, business analyst, financial analyst roles, was an auditor for a year. And so a lot of data-driven insights have kind of been the theme of my career up until now.
Fantastic. That sounds very similar to myself as well. What would you say led you or inspired you to pursue a career in finance?
In finance, somewhat fell into it. So my major coming out of undergrad was more of an operations management supply chain. So started off in supply chain management for an IT procurement, and within that did a lot of more business analysts. So digging into the data and kind of fell into a role that was more supporting some of the teams from a financial perspective and realized I really enjoyed that. And so tended to choose roles from there that were more on the finance side, went back to school to get a little more of the formal financial education versus, the supply chain, which my undergrad had been, and just continue to press on learning more and taking those, FP&A roles.
Yeah, fantastic. Awesome. Um, so next question is a fun one I like to start with, which is what would be your favorite quote or a quote that you come back to again and again, maybe in hard times or something that that stuck with you through, and what does that mean to you?
So the quote that I have on my gym flag in my garage gym is effort is a choice. So there are a lot of things that are going to be outside of your control, whether it's work, personal life, but the effort that you put into whatever the task is. So whether it's the motivation for one more set, one more rep at work is you're working on something, the effort that you put in is the choice, and that's what you can control.
Yeah, I like that. I like that whole kind of idea of focus on what you control and focus on the energy that you bring or the effort that you put in. I like that a lot. So let's jump in. So for the audience, maybe we can just talk a little bit about cloud financial management, this term FinOps. What does that mean? What kind of companies really need to look at cloud financial management? Just give us a bit of a sense.
Yeah, so the cloud financial management, it really encompasses all of the activities that are going to happen if you're operating in the cloud. So if you're in AWS, um, you think about you have your technical, your architecture folks that they are choosing which instances to use, which storage to use to run your applications, to run your business.
Mhm.
Then you also have someone in finance that is creating variance reports, doing budgeting, forecasting. You have someone in procurement that is looking at purchase order issuance, terms of any contracts. You have security to make sure those applications that you're working on that they are resilient, that they're secure. And so the cloud financial management is really bringing all of those activities under an umbrella and making sure that those teams are not operating in a silo. So that's really the best practice of CFM is your finance people talking with your tech people, understanding the procurement side of things. And so having that collaboration across all of those different teams to really unlock the total value of the cloud.
Yeah, that's awesome. And this isn't just for tech businesses, right? I assume this is for any business that is, and more people are moving their internal IT workloads up to the cloud. So yeah,
Absolutely. So as if you're operating in the cloud, all of those activities I just named are happening in your company, whether or not you have a formal program that
yeah,
is your cloud center of excellence or
yeah.
cloud business office. They're all happening. And so having them understand each of those different operations are
Mm.
where you're gonna, have that best value.
Okay. Okay. So it's working with an IT team. If you're or if you're a technology business, there's the software development side of actually building product, shipping product, operating product, and there's also some internal IT aspect to it. And then just talk about size of company, size of the problem. So in smaller companies, it's probably just the finance team that are doing this as part of other responsibilities in finance. Just talk about that a bit.
Yeah, and you're right. So, a lot of times, even with some companies that are larger than you would imagine, the financial side of cloud finance
Hmm.
tends to be a side of the desk
Yeah.
job for someone, or they're voluntold. Hey, we want someone focusing more on the cloud, and you are it
Okay.
versus having those formal, cloud center of excellence where you have dedicated finance professionals focusing just on the cloud finance aspect. And so it becomes a challenge, whether it is a smaller company or a large from the finance side, that you have all these other activities that you're working on. You have your headcount ramp, your professional services. Cloud is just one GL, line item in everything that you are working on, but it is so dynamic. It is so much driven by the more knowledge you have, the more that you can drive insights. And so what we see is a maturity scale of customers that when they're somewhat immature on the cloud within cloud finance, it becomes more of a side of the desk role. As they grow and mature, both in what they are, the services they're leveraging in the cloud and their own internal knowledge, you do tend to see more formal programs of Maybe someone in the finance is completely dedicated to the cloud finance. Maybe you have a team of finance professionals, or this formal center of excellence, which has cross-discipline team members.
Okay. Okay. Um, so let's talk about kind of how did you get into this space? So were you voluntold? Is that how this happened?
So I was at Capital One a few years ago, and they've been very public about their journey to the cloud, of closing out their data centers, moving all in on the cloud. Number of business cases out there. And as that journey was happening, they wanted to have a dedicated person for the business case of moving to the cloud. So all of those, the puts and takes of closing data centers, cloud increasing, everything that encompassed. So I worked on the business case as they were looking to close the data centers. At the same time, they stood up a cloud finance team. And as the data centers were closing, there was less on the business case aspect and now more on the cloud finance side. And since I was already, pretty tangentially related to that piece of it, leaned in more on the actual cloud finance space. And so that was just really increasing my knowledge of services, of the total FinOps perspective at Capital One, and then moved over to be able to help other customers do the same thing in my role at
Yeah,
AWS now.
yeah, bringing the perspective as a customer in to then help. That's awesome. What would you say are some of the challenges? So what makes it hard to manage the finances, optimize the finances, track variances, those sorts of things?
So if you're coming from a company that is going on that similar journey of data center to the cloud, then your processes within the data center, if you need more servers, more storage, you have this long lead time. You need to have capacity planning for how many servers are we going to need. Engineers, can then provision those. You purchase them, and then it becomes, we amortize over 3 years, but pretty set amortization schedule. Well, now that you're in the cloud, everything is decentralized and instantly provisioned. And so you can have tens, hundreds, thousands of engineers that are out there able to provision the resources they need for the roles, for the role that they're trying to do. And so trying to have a lens of what are our costs going to be when you have gone from a very controlled procurement perspective to the decentralized perspective, and then getting a sense of ownership as well. So cloud has just almost countless data points within your cost and usage, and understanding who provisioned the architecture, what team owns it, having them have sense of the ownership of budget, so then they can help with the variances. So a
Yeah,
lot of that goes of, what is your cloud architecture? Do you have a tagging or a chargeback showback? Can you say this team spent X amount of dollars? How does that relate to their budget and forecast? Why are there variances between those? And so the relationship between finance and tech needs to become much closer.
yeah, yeah. So I've been exposed to this in my work in product and engineering teams. It's very common that you would be working on a project. Sort of say, for example, we used to run these hack weeks, like hackathons, for the developers to just work on new ideas. And so they didn't want, people changing live code or working in production. So they would spin up these services for the hack week and then forget to spin them back down again, forget to tag them. And so they're just sitting there running. I suppose you still had that problem in the old days where you would end up, someone would put a purchase order in and buy some software, buy some hardware, and you'd sit there and you would own it for years. Whereas in the new world, you can just switch it off when somebody remembers to get around to it. But there's some very different challenges in this new world, right?
And it's a great call out of best practices, is if you have your environments tagged or your
Yeah.
accounts named,
Hmm.
production, non production, then looking at trends in your non-production space to see exactly to that point. Did we forget to turn something off? Did we,
Yeah.
turn off the instances, but we didn't turn off the storage associated with those instances? And so that challenge of exactly what you said of it's very easy to happen, and then having the knowledge on maybe your cloud center of excellence, your finance, to look at the data, understand what it means, and ask the right questions
Yeah.
to the tech side. Why is our non-production environment still high? I thought we were done with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet in your role you've seen some absolute sort of clangers, some big wastes of money. Do you have any shareable anecdotes or things, or maybe it's just things that you always look for because people tend to yeah, it's a sort of a common area of waste or inefficiency.
Yeah, so we get a lot of requests in my role from our customers of, a generic help us save money. Where are we operating inefficiently is probably the better way to describe that. And so we walk through somewhat of a playbook of for the different services, these are inefficiencies that we look for.
Hmm.
So for an example, for your EC2 instances, so your servers, what we want to look at is are you spending less on weekends than you are on weekdays? Most business patterns, have it you operate it more on the weekdays versus weekends,
Yeah.
especially in a non-production environment. So
Yeah.
if we go in and we see you spend the same amount every single day, even in a non-production environment, then looking at are your people actually testing on weekends, or can you turn it off,
Yeah.
then save money.
Okay.
Same way for storage. There are different storage classes. And so, do you need all of your data in the most expensive hot storage, or can you use different tiers of storage and save, significant amounts of money by just choosing the proper storage tier? And
Yeah.
so the knowledge of where can you potentially look for savings using the data to show here's current behavior and here are maybe best practices or what can change. And
Hmm.
that's something where I think finance can really shine. They're very good in day-to-day roles of taking data, make it into easily digestible bullet points. Here's a graph that anyone can look at and see. And so the challenge of cloud finance is getting the knowledge of the tech space enough to be
Yeah.
able to bring your kind of finance lens to it.
Yeah. Okay. And let's just chat about tools and technologies that you use commonly to do your job. So you're obviously with AWS, probably have a bunch of fantastic tools. There are other clouds, and I assume they have some useful tools as well. So in your role or in cloud finance management, what are some of the common tools and techniques that you apply?
Yeah. So AWS has a number of native tools. So Cost Explorer is the default to our
Mm.
go-to tool of looking at your AWS costs. And then you also have the CUR, it's the cost and usage report, which is all of the data and metadata behind your usage that can be brought into a tool called QuickSight that AWS has, which think of it like Tableau dashboards, a similar one,
Okay.
or third-party tools
Yeah.
can then ingest the CUR as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Okay. So you pull that in, and then what are you doing on that data? Do you have to blend it together with other data? Do you have a lot of data cleanup to do, or how does that
The
look?
the data is usually fairly clean of what your cost and usage is. That's
Yeah.
what's driving your bill, but it can also be overwhelming. So we have customers that may be ingesting a billion rows a month of data in there.
Okay.
And so understanding what to do with it, you mentioned, the other data sources. So maybe you have an account and then you use another data source that you want to bring the account owner and the account developer and who owns those, or the cost center so you can do your chargebacks.
Yeah.
And so how do you enhance the data coming from AWS to make sure it works for your, financial and business practices.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. You just mentioned chargebacks. Actually, it's an interesting one. Do you see most people running a chargeback system where they actually try and move the cost to the business unit or department that's running the service, or what would you say is standard?
That's really the maturity spectrum of
Okay.
it. So it tends to be as you're new on the cloud, you may not have all of the tagging there or the ability to figure out who's using it. So you
Okay.
start implementing tagging. Maybe
Yeah.
you do a show back. We're not going to move the dollars yet, but we do want people to understand who owns the costs. Then you
Yeah.
move to the chargeback where your finance team are actually doing journal entries. You have your single pane of glass of your costs, so everyone can go in there and make sure that they understand, this is my cost center. These are the costs associated with it. You're going to have a budget for that cost center.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we do tend to help customers with as well. What does a chargeback process look like?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I like that. I really like those terms, showback and chargeback. So showback, basically report, like really good reporting so people can see, but and for their area as well, they can really pinpoint what they're using, what they're spending, and then chargeback. It's a whole
Actually moving the dollars
exactly.
associated
It
with it.
kind of, which is where the true kind of ownership accountability starts landing, because then it hits people's bottom line, hits their targets, various things like that. And what about forecasting, planning, kind of performance management in the space? So trying to use some of that data, not just looking back, but trying to actually change behavior, trying to drive cost savings, trying to drive, better, more efficient usage. What does that look like?
We tend to work with our customers that are trying to work through some of their forecasting challenges of really understanding the workloads or however you've ring fenced
Mm.
your accounts or your costs, because you can group them in a couple different areas. They're going to be applications or workloads that do not exist now, but your developers in their next 3 6 week sprints are working on it.
Yeah,
So they should have a sense of what do they expect the costs are going to be. So getting the developers, the architects to provide this, it doesn't exist, so we have no history for it, but we know it's going to exist in six
okay.
months. And then your largest workloads are going to be the Pareto principle. A small amount of workloads are going to drive an oversized amount of your costs. And
Yeah,
so working with those, developers, those owners, of having a discussion where here's a model, here's your history, but what do you have planned that the data is not telling me? Which you probably can't do for all of your workloads, but if
yeah,
you can do it for, a significant account of the spend, then you can apply some, general guidance, maybe a growth rate to the remaining spend. But if you can get those big chunky workloads of having a discussion with the owner, what is your testing plan? What do you expect for any optimization that may happen that the history is not reflective of the future?
yeah,
But really having those conversations, because if you apply a general run rate like you
yeah.
do with maybe some of your professional services or ones like that,
Yeah.
you're likely going to have some large variances.
Okay, okay. So what does that look like normally? Are you running around chatting to everybody? Do you send out a, budget template, trying to get people to fill it in, or do you ask people to just tell you about the things that they know are changing? Any tips there?
We actually implemented budget templates for the largest applications.
Okay.
And that's one area where you can't do it for all of them because then people won't take the time to
Yeah.
actually think through. So you want to be very targeted, but
Okay.
providing a template of here's the history of the services, maybe the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Maybe if you do have good tagging for production and non-production environments, splitting it out that way, and then making it easy for them to either have a dollar impact or a percent growth. We expect
Mm.
5% growth for 6 months and then going to 1%, or we expect a big spike, and then documenting the assumptions being the biggest part. This is what we expect it to be, and
Mhm.
this is why. These are ABC assumptions.
Yeah.
So in 6 months, when you're doing your variance forecast, variance to budget, if something's changed, you understood what was known at that time. We thought
Yeah.
we were going to do more testing, we did less. We thought that we were going to optimize on these services, and we didn't prioritize that because something came up, but this is why your budget was at that time. So having a template that people can work off of for those big ones was really useful.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's cool. And what does a typical week look like? And who are you typically interacting with in a business? Maybe this is sort of winding back to when you were running this in industry. Who for somebody going into a role like this, who are they working with all the time?
So we had a formal cloud center of excellence.
Yeah.
So we had designated teams responsible for optimization on the finance side, where I was on the tech side.
Okay.
So we had standard touch points with our tech side. We had cloud cost champions, so people that were embedded within the different business units
Yeah.
that we would work with them on initiatives. And then we had a lot of education sessions within the finance side to make sure that the finance professionals that weren't as close to cloud as we were as a dedicated team, but it
Yeah.
still impacted their area, that they could understand. So if they heard a term in a meeting like intelligent tiering, we could do a intelligent tiering 101 for finance.
Okay. Yeah.
Let us do an education session. What does it mean, and what are the impacts if we implement this to your budget?
Yeah.
So it was trying to make sure both educational aspect of the different stakeholders, and then understanding the typical variance analysis, and then also like large initiatives. So if there was a large initiative going on, what might that look like a year from now, 2 years from now, from a cost profile, even
Yeah.
if we don't have details at this moment?
Okay. Okay. And what kind of operating cadence works best? Are you running reports weekly, sending them out? Is it best to just go with monthly? And then forecasting, are you forecasting very far out, or it's just a waste of, it's all kind of like a fruitless exercise? What does that look like?
For forecasting, even with some of the customers I work with now, you typically can't do a full detailed forecast, to the minutia every single month. It's not
Right.
going to, at some point, people would just
That's a
put
big
in
it.
numbers because it's a forecast again.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
you probably have a deep forecast maybe 2 times a year,
Okay.
then a lighter touch to,
Like a
just have your
problem.
material changes you want to capture in there, and then you have your normal monthly variance analysis. But
Yeah.
we had weekly analysis that we looked at what were some of the largest increases or decreases week over week. So then we had a handle on what might be going on. It's going to help with our variance analysis, but also, maybe we've identified a cost trend that hadn't been captured before, and we still have time to make a change. And then on the tech side, they tend to have anomaly detection, which may be a 24-hour one, so much more real time from a service perspective. So if something spikes, they can look at it and change it, which
Yeah.
that cadence is probably too much for finance
Yeah.
professional. Works for tech side,
Okay.
having those intermediary between instant and monthly, having some sort of check in between.
Yeah, right. And so this is where probably as a finance person, you want to know that there's good controls in place so that there aren't these sort of major events that you don't catch until a week later or, until the next time you review. So you would look to make sure some of those controls and alerting is in place to make sure that. And do you have, can you set limits and spend limits and other things in certain places? Do you recommend that?
Yeah, so you can have those cost anomaly detections within AWS. You can set budget alerts
Yeah.
where you actually can set notifications on the workload level for a dollar or a percentage. You can have those go out to different stakeholders, and cost increases may not be a bad thing.
Hmm.
In finance, it's about understanding the why.
Yeah.
It went up. Why is that a good thing? Maybe testing was happening. Maybe
Yeah.
your site had a run on whatever you're selling, and it cost went up because you sold a bunch. It
Your
depends.
revenue went up. Yeah.
Reason why.
Yeah.
And so that's where having the stakeholders that you can communicate to from the finance. We
Mm.
notice your cost increase. Can you help us understand why? Is also they're going to help your variance report
Yeah.
at the end of the month. You're not having to track down 10 big variances. You may have already figured out 3 or 4 of them throughout the month.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Nice. So let's jump into some personal stories, maybe some lessons learned from your side. So I like my favorite question to ask is, do you have a power pose memory? So let me just explain. So like, I don't know, imagine you just had a really successful meeting where you managed to add a lot of value. You walk out and you just want to stand there and like power pose, just like soak in the glory of of it. Or maybe you were tackling a really complex model. You said you're dealing with sometimes billions of rows of data. So do you have a particular power pose memory that comes to mind?
Yeah, so it works for both, a very challenging time in my
Okay.
career as well as a power pose of just the aftermath.
Okay.
So, years ago was at a company and we were going to work with a third party vendor. There was an RFP out there and they provided this, financial model or their terms that was this giant PDF with tons of different terms, and we tended to be high level. What do we think this is going to be? Digging into it, realized I need to build a complete 5-year monthly model for all of these terms to have any way of being able to understand what this was going to be. And so, worked on that probably, day and a half, get invited to a meeting with the vendor, and I expected to be just a fly on the wall. I presented a deck to my leadership, thought they would lead the conversation. I'm there to just answer a couple questions. We get on the call. One of the leaders turns to me, is like, "All right, Jeff, you've got it." I'm deer in the headlights. I'm very much low person in the room. I think we had some MVPs or SVPs
Uh-huh.
on there, with their, the customer's team. And so I start going through some of the challenges of how the pricing model was set up, and some of like, did I understand this right? Are you telling me if this happens, this does? And there were a few, just the way it was written, kind of uncovered a few terms that we needed to push back on.
Mhm.
And so it was all entirely on the fly. I think I spoke 90% of the call and hang up, and it was kind of like, that was great. I was new to the company, so a lot of people
Yeah.
didn't know me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I think it really kind of set me up of, oh, he knows when to get into the details, can kind of think on his feet, but just that absolute deer in the headlights of, I'm leading this call of people I've never met before. So kind of walking out, there was a little bit of collecting myself after the adrenaline wore off. Like,
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah.
that was a good meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Good. Yeah, it sounds like you stepped up there, which is awesome. What is the craziest advice that you ever gave to a client or, a colleague? Maybe this is the sort of thing that like maybe they weren't expecting to hear it, but you kind of just gave them the truth. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Probably the biggest one is one that was given to me and then I've been able to pass on of not having to over explain your analysis.
Okay.
So I tended to go, if I was going to create a deck for especially senior leadership, I wanted to make sure they understood. I walked through scenarios A through Z. I had thought through all of them.
Yeah.
So my decks would explain all of those little nuances to kind of almost like having to prove myself. Like, no, I've thought through all of this.
Mm.
And finally had someone tell me, like, you don't have to do that. Like, we know that you've walked through all of those. You can answer the questions if they come up. Focus on, the material parts of the deck, simplify it. If
Yeah.
someone has a question in the meeting, that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean they think
Yeah.
you didn't think through it.
Yeah.
Um, but the over explaining of it is something I still have to rein myself in
Yeah.
and find with a lot of finance or some of the tech folks that they do want to show that they have thought through the entire business case, especially if you're going to work with a senior leader. You do want to show that you have that insight, that you are the subject matter expert, without realizing like they're not going in there trying to disbelieve or have a gotcha that you didn't think of this and now I'm gonna think less of your work.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I agree. I think you got to know your audience, and it's amazing. I think finance people do a lot because we dive into the data and the detail, and we want to balance these things as much as possible. And then if you communicate too much, sometimes it's worse than communicating, just a tiny amount because people just switch off and they don't remember anything. So yeah, that's awesome.
And plus, if you've spent 2 days working in PowerPoint and
Yeah.
your pivot tables for two bullet points in a deck, you want to make sure people knew like how hard it was to get to those two bullet points. Not realize like they don't necessarily care. Like they know the data, they know they did a lot of work. You don't
Yeah.
need to explain what it took
Yeah.
to get there to the senior leadership. You
Yeah.
can vent with your boss about that part.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so couple last questions just as we try and bring it into a close. So, what are some of the things that you're most excited about, or exciting challenges in your space right now, or things that you think are going to become very important in the next couple of years?
We have a lot of discussion of how do you embed a cloud financial management, a FinOps culture within the company,
Okay.
getting out of the silos of the different work streams, and what does that look like? For every company, it's going to be a little bit different. Some they do want that cloud center of excellence, a very managed program. Other ones may not need that because just within their culture, they have a lot of cross collaboration and they've identified stakeholders for the different roles. But we have a lot of questions from our customers of how can we best be efficient in the cloud and all working towards one goal within there. And so the education piece becomes very important. The data piece of is everyone understanding what the costs are? Are they all looking at the costs the same? Because there's different ways to look at the data. So I think just continuing to bridge the gap between tech and finance within the cloud finance space. It's a challenge that no one has necessarily solved, but that's what we're working towards.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm a technologist, right? I love technology and what it brings. So we ask in research if you had a magic wand and you could bring any tool, any solution to bear, what would it be and why?
I think from a forecasting perspective or an architectural change, getting to the point where you know exactly what this change will cost a year from now, given current considerations, which there's a lot of work going on
Yeah,
there. The being able to know the exact service for the workload that you're working on. So there are a number of ways that you can approach a problem, an
Mhm.
application, a workload of having a simplistic way to choose the architecture that's going to be most cost efficient
Yeah,
for you, just because there's so many different ways to tackle the problem.
yeah,
And that's where members of my team and some of the other very technical folks. That's what you want to get. What is the most efficient way to use the cloud for what you're trying to accomplish?
yeah, right. Yeah, because that's a combination. It sounds like a combination of it's a forecasting problem, but it's also an IT architecture problem. So because before you can really forecast it in detail, you've got to figure out what your architecture will be, what the cost profile of that architecture is, and then you can start rolling it forward. And I imagine today that's a number of sessions with you know these quite these quite big-brained IT architects involved, asking minutiae questions about the things that impact that, and then forecasting comes after that. That's interesting.
And then what's the business goal of it? I
Yeah.
mean, you're working backwards
Yeah.
from you are trying to accomplish X. So
Yes.
how do you build a solution to accomplish whatever that happens to be, whether it's, the external facing website, the internal processes,
Yeah.
what are the guardrails around that? How much wiggle room do you have on an internal versus an external? There's just so much that goes into an architectural design
Design. Yeah.
on it. So exactly the point. It requires a lot of conversations with a lot of really smart people.
Yeah. And then pricing isn't the easiest thing as well, and especially in cloud, you've got kind of usage based. You could commit to like a dedicated instance, and that brings your cost down. But so there's probably a bunch of things where I imagine you end up rolling your own model because there's just so many different factors. So yeah, okay. If anyone's listening and they want to throw some technology at that, I'm sure that Jeff would love to hear about it. Um, Awesome. Last couple of questions. So is there a piece of advice that's stuck with you throughout your career?
I guess really for anything within finance, you have a business partner or someone that you're supporting, whether it's a revenue-based role, OpEx role, finding someone within that group that becomes kind of your ally, your partner that you can bounce ideas off of in an informal manner,
Yeah,
and that you can learn more about the business. So the better you understand the business you're supporting, the better your forecasting, your variance analysis becomes. The better you understand cloud, the better, same thing, your variance analysis, the insights that you can deliver. And sometimes just identifying the person that you can, say like, hey, this is a stupid question, but can you help me out here? Versus maybe you don't want to go to senior leadership about something that you might be a little bit you think is basic.
yeah,
So identifying those allies kind of across the stakeholder engagement that you're on is huge.
yeah. Amazing. What are some go-to books and resources that you use to learn?
So I am constantly, Googling services and looking at either just the what is the pricing. Someone may say a service,
Yeah.
not as familiar with that. Let me go look at what the pricing is set up for that.
Okay.
Uh, YouTube has, just so many resources out there for AWS. My own team, we actually have the Keys to Optimization weekly Twitch show that's on
Okay.
YouTube. That's a weekly show that has a number of different people that come on and talk about cloud financial management topics. So I go
Yeah.
back and rewatch those all
Yeah.
the time. Have a question and that becomes a resource. Oh, they talked about a cur query. Let me go watch the episode on that one. A
Yeah.
lot of times that'll get the question. So it's constantly just seeing what is out there that other people may have written to increase my knowledge.
Yeah. Fantastic. What is your favorite chart or visualization and why?
A bar graph with a unit cost on the secondary axis. is
Okay.
just such a powerful tool because in cloud, one of the things that we want to show are your unit cost economics. And
Yeah.
so, cost increasing may or may not be a bad thing if your unit cost is
Okay.
decreasing. You're doing more with less. And
Okay.
so you can, quickly show someone, bar chart. This is our week, yearly,
Yeah.
cost by month. And if
By
your
month.
unit cost is going down,
Yeah.
then, look, we are much more efficient than we were,
Yeah.
in January. When we get to December, we're doing more. And then what might be driving the overall growth? That may be
Yeah.
increased revenue. And so just having that simple secondary axis
Yeah.
bar with the unit cost
Mhm.
one
A few close.
lands the point to
Yeah.
about any audience.
Yeah. That's awesome. Love it. Thank you very much. Jeff, what is the best way for people to get in touch if they want to reach out to you on the internet, on the interweb?
Yeah, please find me on LinkedIn. Love hearing what some other people are doing within the cloud financial management space.
Yeah.
I've had a couple appearances on that Keys to Optimization Twitch show, which have been fun. I've got a couple blog posts out on the AWS CFN blog, more of that finance perspective
Yeah.
out there. So love to connect.
Awesome. Fantastic. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insights, helping everybody understand a little bit more about cloud finance management and how to make the most out of this awesome resource.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
thanks, Simon.
Yeah, cheers.